Okay, so I guess the fairly recent announcement by the government that it was in favour of or approving these reservoir builds, which have been a long time, shall we say, in the pipeline, but finally seem to be getting somewhere. I guess that's the most recent and obvious sort of acknowledgement that water conservation efficiency are still continue to be a pretty major issue for the UK. I mean, no surprises, but just how important are they, I suppose, is a good place to start.
It's, I mean, it is. It's one of a number of things, and it's great to see some of these big projects hitting the press because I think what happens with that is it really resonates with people. So, there is no model out there, there's no forecast out there that will tell you anything other than we are on a path towards increasing water scarcity. Okay, and you can look at the Environment Agency, you can look at SEPA up in Scotland, you can look at demand models of population, you can look at climate models, you can look at business use, you can look at consumerism. They all head in the same direction. And what that says is if you look out 2040, 2050, you're going to see serious water scarcity issues around the UK if we don't make a big change to the way in which we view and the way in which we use water. So yes, it's one signal, but it's one of many signals for it.
Yeah, and in terms of what needs to change, I mean, there's I won't say no shortage, but most of the focus certainly seems to be on domestic consumption, households, what they can do. And I'd be interested, how important is that compared to what we're going to chat about, which is the business side of things? Because clearly there are some big water users business, but every business has some use of basic water, wastewater, etc. So I guess what's the balance between those two? So how important is it for businesses to take it seriously? And I guess they're looking at sustainability, a lot of them, but also there's potentially some cost saving if they don't need to use as much water or get rid of as much waste. So just thoughts as to how important business is compared to domestic and the opportunity, I suppose.
Yeah, so I mean, to put a sort of picture on that size, and I'm referencing stats from an independent company, Waterwise here, but about 30% of water usage in the UK is business related, right? So that puts a scale into how much is personal and how much is business. Of that 30%, about half of that comes from the top 1% of businesses in terms of size, right? So some of these very large organizations, and I'm not saying they're to blame, they're not to blame at all. They just use it as part of their process to, build cars or manufacture products or distill whiskey or beer or whatever it may be. So it's as important in both camps, 100%. We work in a business to business industry and we operate with businesses. So our focus very much is to help organizations reduce that sort of, footprint that comes with water. On your point, there's a few elements. So one, cost, absolutely, right? And we're about to see, and it's been in the press, it's on the front page of the BBC News articles in previous weeks about prices increasing for water, considerably more so in England. In some pockets, water prices are going to increase. This is wholesale prices will increase by as much as 40+%. So if you're a large user of water, that is a significant difference to your bottom line. Now, what that does is it brings it to very much sharp focus for organizations that I really now need to do something about that rather than treating it as a commodity. So for me, it's vital. Secondly, about 5-6% of UK greenhouse gas emissions are attributed to water use as well. So if you look at that sustainability curve, and if you look at the impact on, man-made climate change, et cetera, there's a good chunk of our UK emissions that are related in some part to water usage or the water industry. So by reducing that, you can reduce your footprint. Most times you turn on a tap, a heat pump goes, a boiler gets turned on, or even if it's not that, there's a carbon footprint cost to treating sewage as it goes through our system. So the less you use, the less carbon footprint. So there's a huge amount in that space that there is incentives for business in terms of reducing cost. Estimations, and again, taking independent numbers, not from myself, is that the average business is 20 to 30% overutilizing water because of leaks, because of inefficiencies, because of lack of awareness simply. So you add all of those numbers up that I've just given you, and I'm not going to do the math, so don't worry. You can see the scale of opportunity there, but also possibly the scale of inefficiency that's also going on at the same time. So huge opportunity, but for us, it's about helping those customers make them aware of that, but also guide them towards what they can do and what they can do differently.
Yeah, and on that front, it'd be good to understand, I suppose, what's been achieved to date and what more. And also, I must ask, are you slightly depressed? Because I mean, I've been in the water industry, I expect you have for quite a while, and it's no secret, everyone's been talking about these things for decades. Are you slightly depressed that a lot of businesses, presumably that you're in touch with or come to you, haven't kind of worked out there is an opportunity here? What's going wrong, if you like, that they don't start looking at these things?
I mean, of course, when in any walk of life, if you see a problem and something isn't being done about it, it can get you down a little bit. What I would say is I'm really proud and passionate of the work that we have done for organizations, right? So even if you look back the last 3 years, sort of since COVID, we often look at life pre and post COVID. So a lot of our stats, if we look at sort of since 2020, we've saved about 5.9 billion litres of water for our customers through interventions and work and advice and efficiencies that we've done with that. And that's around about sort of 11, 12 million pounds worth of, combined water and energy use spend across that. So, what can we do is we can help guide people towards those areas and say, look, we've got a track record of doing this. Whether you do it with us or not, of course, I'd love to help customers, but part of our job is that awareness piece. And saying that you can do more in that space, and then try and guide those customers through, dare I say it, a journey that would allow them to understand their starting point, as is many the case with any sort of piece. If you don't know anything about it, you've got to go right back to the start and understand the basics, and then what you can do and walk through and do that. Now, if through that process you reduce your carbon footprint and reduce your costs and increase your ESG credentials, you're going to tick a lot of boxes along the way whilst you're doing that. And it's about helping people see that path as you go through that, which is a real big part of what we do with our customers and organizations we work with.
In terms of the size of the opportunity, because I guess you must, look at it to plan what your future. I mean, in terms of if there's 100% opportunity, are we well under 50% so far in terms of the progress business has made, or are we nearly halfway? But is it possible to try and work out where we are?
So I would say, I wouldn't like to put a number on it, but I would say we are very early in that maturity curve, right? And a lot of businesses we speak to, so some businesses are exceptionally good with their water usage. It's usually because it's part of their manufacturing process or even part of their product. So if you're a distillery, by using less water to produce your product, you will increase your profit margins and make yourself more competitive and be more environmentally friendly. So there's a vested interest for that business to do that. If I'm a car wash and I'm just going to charge people for how many cars I wash, and water is really, really cheap for me, well, I'm probably less invested in reducing my water usage and spending a lot of money on, efficiency units and assets and things like that. That said, the world has moved on, and the payback on some of these things is much sharper than a lot of people realize. So there are more opportunities there, but I do think we're early in that maturity scale for certain.
Yeah, and I think you sort of alluded to that, is the main problem that, as you say, if you work in the drinks industry, or I don't know, in the semiconductor industry, where water is a massive part of the process of producing your final product solution, then you get it. But if you just work in or own an office block where there clearly are toilets, taps, whatever, you just maybe don't think it's going to make much of a difference. So therefore, people just haven't really investigated what's possible. Is that a harsh characterization, or is that reasonable?
I mean, I think that's certainly true in pockets of the business, and it would be a bit like comparing it to people that do and don't recycle their plastics, right? Some people do and will recycle absolutely everything they do, and some people won't, which is the equivalent of somebody leaving a tap on when they leave the room, or flushing the toilet twice when they didn't need to, or going in the shower for far longer than needed, or whatever it may be, right? But yes, when there isn't a direct link between your water usage and your costs, and maybe your, I guess, what you call your business KPIs, which may be, your profit or your customers or your market share, then yes, less attention is going to be paid to it in the boardroom by any business. Absolutely. That said, we're working with a large office-based organization as a FTSE 100 business on, looking at how they can become water neutral. So they are really trying to get ahead of the curve and say, how as we as an organization, how can we be water neutral in everything we do? And we're trying to work with them on community projects and other elements where they can pay back into the community on water that they're using or trying to offset. So some businesses are a long way ahead of this, and some businesses are behind. It depends who you speak to.
Okay, and in terms of the way you work with organizations, what's the process from initial sort of contact, consultation to working with them as they develop things? I mean, do you do everything from just taking a brief look and giving them a leaflet or wherever to say, look, this is some of the things you can do, thanks and good luck, to actually sort of working with them throughout their journey until, some agreed sort of point in the future, if you like?
Yeah, and to your point, it can be any of those things. Where it's most effective is where we are more hands-on, and how that looks is, the first thing, and this would be similar in energy or other things, you've got to understand what you're currently using today, and how does that baseline compare to what good would look like in that space. So we have a lot of data of benchmarking average water usage by, business size, by office size, by, industry area, etc. So if we take on a new customer, we can say, look, you've got 100 offices across the UK, you've got footfall at average of X, you should be using round about this in a world of averages. Actually, we've looked at your data and it's high or it's low. You can then go in and investigate, look at certain peaks and troughs. Some offices may be using twice as much as any, and go in, and then you can start looking at interventions. And it may be simple things like leaky loos or inefficient taps or bad pipe work or whatever it may be, or it may be a lot down to behavioral change. It may be that they don't have water efficient services in their building, and it can be a myriad of different things. On top of that, there's other organizations we work with and look at, things like rainwater harvesting systems where they only need grey water to wash their cars. And actually, there is a more efficient way to collect water for certain parts of how their business uses water, rather than taking straight out what is essentially a carbon intensive process to create potable water that, takes it to certain parts. So there's a myriad of different things. What I would say with all the customers we work with is just try and understand where you are. Right. And, even if you're not working with us and you're having no engagement with us, first thing is understand where you are and understand where you should be, and then try and get some data. We have a lot of tools that we've built internally where we can take meter reading data, consumption data, compare and do predictive analysis against that says, look, if you did this, this would be the outcome, this would be the cost, this would be the return, whether that's carbon, financial, whatever it may be. So it's about working through that. For small businesses, and I'm talking cafes, corner shops, of which we have tens of thousands of customers like that, they can't always afford to go and spend all of this money on large sort of, CapEx-based interventions. So we have a lot of online advice, hints, tips, how to use water better, point them to stats and analysis, and try and provide as much advice as we can that way, basically.
And in terms of achieving the success, clearly there's plenty that the organisation can do, sort of regardless, I guess, of how their employees will or won't engage. But is getting employee engagement, is that, I guess it is important, but is it always easy to get folks on side, or is that part of the problem even once you've decided that it's a good idea to go forward with this water efficiency? If half your staff just go kind of shrug their shoulders and like, you're not going to tell me how long I can wash my hands for, or whatever it is, how does that work, I suppose?
It's a huge part of any behavioral change problem, and there'll be examples in society of successful and unsuccessful versions of that. You have to get a significant percentage of people, along on that journey. And if you don't get that, you really will just get a depletion of effort. You'll get a surge and then everyone will retract back to where they were. It has to be part of the culture that, your business is buying into. So I would always encourage people that are trying to do it is raise it up their internal agenda as high as you possibly can and make it a commitment that you're doing as a business. and attach that commitment to some benefits. That may be financial, it may be, how your brand is perceived because you're now being a more sustainable business. That attracts better people. People like to work for sustainable organizations, but certainly there has to be some attachment from the bottom to the top of the business that we are buying into this. And I would speak that generally about anything in the sustainability space, because you're 100% correct. If you don't get a significant proportion of people along for that journey, you essentially won't get that bow wave of momentum that you need to get across that. So we do try and support customers with that. Are we behavioral change and psychological experts in those matters? No, but we will try and give them advice on, here are the tools and tips that you can use to help do that. Even simple things like posters up in toilets and various different things can actually make quite a big difference, because people stop and check and think about what they're doing when they are using certain things. And if that is linked to their company's objectives, all the better.
And I'm just wondering, this might not be true, but clearly if the business can explain the benefits to them, their employees may well sort of jump on board. But is there any element of, as there may well be, I think, in the domestic side, people think, oh, these water companies are making large profits and they're increasing my bills. Why should I kind of help with water conservation if that's seen to be helping that? Is that at all an attitude, or is that, or we got beyond that sort of problem, if you like?
I don't think in pockets we've got beyond that, and I don't want to, get too much into the politics of, large wholesalers and things like that. But yeah, it is something we have to honestly face into, because there is press out there, and they will make comments and draw conclusions on why some things are happening and where investment is and shouldn't be made. What we've been really, really strong with is engagement with those wholesalers and engagement with the right market groups, whether that's Mosul or Ofwat or whoever it may be, to try and be the voice of the customer in those conversations, to say, look, this is what is best for the end customer. So how can we help guide that into the right direction, essentially? But yeah, I think in any walk of life, there's always going to be bad press and noise over here that can distract people. It's about focusing the mind on where you're trying to get to.
And in terms of specific, I don't know, tools that are out there to help folks, whether it's from yourselves or others, and also I guess the potentially funding initiatives, partnerships, grants, that sort of thing. What's the range of things that potentially are available to people to help them address this, other than obviously going to their, I don't know, a plumber or whatever it is and saying you need to redo our whole system, to be water efficient, whatever. I don't know, that's a slightly crude example, but yeah, what can people kind of do for themselves, I guess, before other people?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. There are tools out there that are available to look at your water usage and consumption. We offer that, and other businesses offer that. That's not a unique thing. However, taking that and comparing that to other elements of the market is quite unique and something that I think is important. So, but again, data and usage and understanding that. Secondly, there's all manner of water efficiency tips and availability. And even if you look at independent companies like WaterWise, who are probably really the leading independent lights in this space, have some fantastic content and online, and a list of their sort of 10 strategic objectives of how they're trying to help the industry as a whole reduce water usage and drive water efficiency. So they have a lot of hints. So there's a wealth of information there, and whether it's Mosul and some of the industry bodies as well, as well as your retailer from that point of view as well. So, and on top of that, yes, there are physical devices out there that can help you, whether it's putting an aerated tap in at a hairdresser's because it will literally use 80% less water than the ones you are using. But things like that are quite easy to research up and understand and do a sort of cost comparison on. So I think there's a lot out there. What I don't think it's done is promoted and pushed to people. So I think people have to go looking for it, which I think is one of the bigger problems at the moment, in the fact that I don't want to shove this up people's noses, because nobody likes that about anything. But we need to be more proactive and say, look, we know this is an issue because we live and breathe it. You may not know this is an issue. So here's how we can help. And here's all the tools and tips that will enable you to get to a better place.
Yeah, and I guess in terms of making that switch from reactive to proactive water management, if that's what we call it, presumably ultimately government is is that, regardless of whatever flavour it might be at the time, they have to sort of lead and say, to the start of the conversation, we can sit here and do nothing, but in 10 years' time, without scaring people too much, your tap might, run dry 3 months of the year or whatever it is. So there needs to be that sort of right from the top and all the way down, whether the water companies maybe engage, etc. I'm not saying it's impossible without that, but if we don't have that leadership, I guess it's that much more difficult to get everyone else to buy in. Is that fair?
100%. Leadership's everything, especially when, you're talking about quite significant large scale change in behaviors and approach and investment here. So, if you don't have strong leadership from the top, then people aren't going to listen, or they're going to check out. If you look at countries that are retracting from things like the Paris Agreement in the wider sustainability piece, well, what is that telling the people that live in that country? It's telling them it's not important and I don't need to care about it anymore. So, therefore the opposite is true. And whether that's a leader at a government level, or as I was saying earlier, it is the chief exec or of an MD of a business, of putting it on their KPI board and saying, this is really, really important to us. So I want all of the 40 or 400 or 4,000 people in my business to pay attention to that. And here's how you can make a difference to that number on the scoreboard up there. Now, that's true leadership, and that is allowing people to follow them. So, and it's interesting you say that, because Waterwise, I was speaking about earlier, their first and primary strategic objective of the 10 that they have is about leadership. And it is about driving leadership through the market and how you lead from the front and show people where they can make that difference.
Okay, and maybe finally, and I know it's difficult times, but do you worry at all? You've alluded to some of the things going on geopolitically, shall we say. Do you worry that there might even be a catastrophic or a gentle pushback, or however you characterize it, and sustainability might be in danger of dropping down the agenda, if not off people? Is that a worry, or do you think that most, fortunately enough, good work has been done up until this point, that it's kind of in the muscle memory, so people will kind of carry on with it regardless of the mixed messaging, shall we say?
I think, and yes, I completely get your point. I think we've crossed that chasm. So I think we've got far enough. And I think if you look at, and yes, there's commentary and news about big businesses retracting from certain things, but actually, if you look at some of the large scale organizations and how far they have now come, whether it's on net zero target or water neutrality targets or whatever it may be, they've invested so far. And some businesses are really reaping the rewards of that, in terms of their, brand position in the market, or their ability to attract good talent, because, Gen Z want to work for a green and sustainable business. Therefore, they're going to choose you. No one's ever going to be aligned to the same values, at all times. So there's work to do. The most important point for me about that is we can't be complacent. We can't say the good work is now done and it's all downhill from here. We just have to keep pushing that message and pushing the right positive, information and, as we said earlier, leadership across the industry.
Okay, and maybe just finally for your sales business stream, what else? I mean, clearly you've got a great business model, and as you've explained, you've done a lot of tremendous work already. Is it? And I don't mean this, really, is it more of the same, or are there other sort of things you're looking at doing to sort of grow your offering, to bring it, more, give it more publicity? Just what does your future look like, I suppose, is the question.
Yeah, so it's a good question. I mean, we want to carry on doing more of what we're doing. So again, I spoke about, where I think the industry is being quite early in the maturity curve. I like to think we're a bit further along that maturity curve in the way we think and we help businesses, but we've still got a long way to go as well. So some of the technologies I was speaking about earlier, we are, still working through what the next stage and the next stage and the next stage of the roadmap looks like for that technology. As, all the advances with AI and various things come over the hill, how can we leverage that and make that much more sort of digestible and easy to use for our customers? Because the easier it is for our customers to, log onto our portal and see that their consumption has spiked and they should do something about it, the more likely they are. So for me, it's a lot about how can we drive that information directly into the customer's hand, enable them to make those decisions and drive their business. Meanwhile, how do we learn from the market and other things that are coming up and make sure that we can always answer those questions and we can always support those customers, because things will be around the corner that we haven't yet thought of. We're doing great things at the moment, but more things will come along. And I always want us to be in the position to, as I think we can today, but always be in this position to help any customer in this space and help them drive down their water use, drive down their costs, drive down their carbon footprint, and essentially help their business operate better as a result.
Okay, it's been great to chat, and some brilliant thoughts and insights into what's going on in what's, as we know, is a very topical and will continue to be important area. So, Tom, really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Philip. Nice to speak to you too. Thanks a lot.